On September 22, 2025, Super Typhoon Ragasa made landfall in southern China with devastating force, bringing sustained winds of 106 km/h and gusts up to 120 km/h. Streets instantly transformed into rivers. Cars floated helplessly, and rooftops were torn off like paper under the violent winds. Hong Kong, Macau, and the coastal regions of Guangdong were thrown into chaos as millions of residents scrambled for shelter. Floodwaters swallowed entire neighborhoods. Emergency shelters reached capacity, and airports were brought to a halt with hundreds of flights canceled or delayed, leaving travelers stranded in a storm of destruction. Trees were uprooted, power lines collapsed, and the roar of the typhoon echoed like a freight train through the streets. This was no ordinary storm. It was a Category 15 equivalent typhoon that turned one of Asia's busiest metropolitan areas into a battleground against the forces of nature. With more rain and dangerous winds still approaching, the night ahead promised to be long and terrifying. By the evening of September 22, 2025, Super Typhoon Ragasa made landfall near the city of Taishan, Guangdong Province, with sustained winds of 106 km/h and gusts exceeding 130 km/h, unleashing torrential rain and storm surges across southern China. Within minutes, coastal towns and urban centers were transformed into chaotic scenes of flooding and destruction. In Hong Kong, water levels surged rapidly, flooding low-lying streets, sweeping cars off roads, and causing construction scaffolding to collapse onto busy thoroughfares. Trees crashed into homes and vehicles. The Hong Kong Observatory issued the highest cyclone warning, urging residents to stay indoors as emergency services struggled to cope with the growing number of incidents across Macau. Violent sea swells battered the city's coastline, tearing through harbors and flooding streets. Authorities closed bridges, suspended ferry services, and evacuated thousands to emergency shelters as rooftops were ripped off by the fierce winds. Meanwhile, in Guangdong Province, rivers overflowed their banks, washing away roads and submerging entire neighborhoods. Residents were forced to climb onto rooftops, use ropes to escape rising waters, or rely on boats to reach safety. Communication networks were disrupted, leaving many families cut off from urgent updates. This initial landfall marked the beginning of a life-threatening disaster, turning one of Asia's most densely populated regions into a chaotic battleground against the unstoppable forces of Super Typhoon Ragasa. Rescue teams were deployed, but the intensity of the storm meant that rescue operations would be both dangerous and extremely challenging. As Super Typhoon Ragasa moved inland, the scale of the destruction became immediately apparent. In Hong Kong, streets turned into torrents of water, with water levels reaching waist-high in some low-lying neighborhoods. Vehicles floated helplessly while pedestrians clung to lampposts and railings to avoid being swept away. Emergency crews worked tirelessly to clear debris, rescue stranded residents, and restore power as thousands faced darkness amid howling winds. Macau was equally hard hit. Coastal districts experienced flooding that submerged streets under several feet of water. Authorities closed schools, workplaces, and public transport services, urging residents to move to safer ground. Over 400 flights at Hong Kong International Airport and nearly 200 flights at Macau International Airport were canceled or delayed, leaving tens of thousands of travelers stranded. Ferry services, vital for connecting the islands, were suspended indefinitely across Guangdong Province. The chaos extended beyond urban centers. Entire neighborhoods in Taishan, Shenzhen, and Jianzhou were evacuated as rivers breached their banks, sweeping away homes and agricultural land. Families clung to rooftops while local authorities set up emergency shelters to accommodate the displaced. Roads were impassable, leaving many isolated, and communication networks struggled under the strain of emergency calls. Meteorologists warned that Ragasa would continue to move westward toward Vietnam, bringing more heavy rainfall and the potential for landslides.
哇靠！车都要被吹走掉了！哇靠！快点躲车哦！把车倒退一下，躲在大巴车这后面哦。
The combination of storm surges, torrential rain, and sustained hurricane-force winds created a life-threatening situation across southern China, forcing authorities to declare an unprecedented state of emergency. The streets of the region became a battleground against nature, highlighting the raw power of Ragasa and the urgent need for residents to follow evacuation orders and safety advisories. The relentless fury of Super Typhoon Ragasa wreaked havoc on infrastructure across southern China. High-rise scaffolding was ripped apart, crashing onto streets and smashing parked vehicles. Trees were uprooted, blocking roads and crushing parked cars. Power lines snapped under the force of the winds, leaving tens of thousands in darkness and complicating rescue efforts. In Hong Kong, the MTR mass transit system suspended all above-ground services, including the East Rail and West Rail lines, halting commuting and leaving passengers stranded. Buses were withdrawn from service, and ferry routes between the islands were suspended. Hong Kong International Airport descended into chaos, with over 420 flights canceled or delayed, leaving travelers stranded and emergency personnel stretched thin. Macau faced similar disruptions. Floodwaters inundated streets, rendering roads impassable. Authorities closed parks, playgrounds, construction sites, and ports, while emergency shelters filled quickly with displaced residents. Airports canceled hundreds of flights, and ferry services remained suspended. Families were forced to seek refuge wherever they could, clutching personal belongings and hoping for safety. Beyond urban centers, Guangdong Province witnessed severe infrastructure failures. Bridges were closed, highways blocked, and drainage systems overwhelmed. Torrential rains caused flash floods that swept through towns, carrying debris and threatening lives. Agricultural lands were submerged, destroying crops and livestock, while industrial zones saw factories shut down, causing economic losses in the millions of dollars. Meteorologists warned that Ragasa's path would continue to produce life-threatening conditions, with potential landslides, river overflows, and storm surges. The storm's sustained intensity, combined with regional vulnerabilities, meant that even after the winds subsided, recovery would be slow and dangerous. The storm left millions at risk, forcing residents to confront the brutal reality of climate-driven disasters and highlighting the urgent need for resilient infrastructure and disaster preparedness.
The world changing, disasters are no longer rare, they are reality. You cannot predict the next earthquake, flood, or wildfire, but you can choose how ready you are. This channel isn't just here to inform, it's here to wake people up before it's too late. So if you're watching this now, take it as a sign. Don't just scroll, don't just watch, subscribe, learn, and prepare. Because awareness isn't fear, it's power.